Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really common. That feeling, that urge to always say yes, always putting others first.
It's a big one.
So we'll be digging into the material you sent us, mostly bits from the therapist's handbook for people pleasers.
That's right. Breaking free from the need to please and reclaim your life.
Our mission here is to really kind of get under the skin of this people-pleasing thing.
Figure out where it comes from.
Exactly. And pull out some practical insights, things you can actually use.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've ever felt that, jolt of anxiety thinking about letting someone down.
Or if your default is just other people first.
Then yeah, this is definitely for you.
Yeah.
We're going to try and extract what really matters to help you understand and maybe start to shift that pattern.
Absolutely. And what's really striking right away in this handbook is the idea that people-pleasing isn't just, being nice or agreeable.
Right.
It's often rooted in some really fundamental human drives and our early experiences.
So it's less a conscious choice.
And more something, deeply ingrained, almost automatic sometimes.
Okay, let's unpack that fundamental part then. The handbook kicks off with our core human need for connection, for belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And that totally makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, right?
It really does. I mean,
Yeah.
Back in the day, being part of the group wasn't just nice, it was literally survival.
Crucial.
Precisely. For millennia, fitting in was essential. So that fear of being kicked out, of social rejection, it can trigger the same, ancient alarm bells in our brain as a physical threat, like a predator or something.
Wow.
Now, for people pleasers, that innate need for connection seems to get dialed way up.
Okay.
So they end up prioritizing others' needs almost instinctively, just to avoid that perceived social danger.
So their system is kind of constantly scanning for disapproval.
Exactly. It's like being on high alert all the time. So that discomfort you might feel about saying no, it could just be a really, really old program running in the background, a sort of evolutionary echo.
Wow. So that tightness in your chest, that anxiety when you even think about letting someone down, that could be an echo from our, tribal past.
It could well be.
That's a powerful thought. And, okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The handbook then dives into how our childhood experiences actually lay the groundwork.
Yeah, this is key.
It's like those early years are the initial coding for how we handle relationships later on.
Exactly. What's crucial to grasp is that as children, we learn to adapt. We adapt to our family environment as a way to feel safe and, get our needs met.
Makes sense.
So experiences like neglect, for instance, where a child's emotional needs aren't consistently met, well, I can teach them to suppress their own desires, almost feel like they're a burden.
Right. If no one seems to notice or care.
You might just learn to stop asking, stop expressing those needs.
Okay.
Similarly, growing up in a home with lots of conflict, a child might learn to constantly try and smooth things over.
Be the peacemaker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
People please, just to keep things calm, maintain some peace.
Yeah.
And then that conflict avoidance can become a default setting in adulthood.
And what about more chaotic environments? The book mentions instability, even violence.
Well, in those situations, people-pleasing can become a very real survival strategy. It's about minimizing risk in really unpredictable, scary situations.
The book also talks about emotional neglect specifically. That lack of clear boundaries or not feeling safe, or maybe love not being expressed freely.
Yeah, they can be particularly impactful. It can teach kids that their own feelings just aren't that important.
Or that love is conditional.
Right. Something you have to earn. And you earn it by constantly pleasing others.
Yeah.
It's genuinely sobering to think about.
It really is.
And we also can't forget the role of just what we see growing up, modeling.
Ah, right. Learned behavior.
Exactly. Kids are like sponges. They observe everything.
Yeah.
So if they see parents or other important adults consistently putting others first, even when it hurts them,
they just internalize that pattern.
Very likely, yeah. It becomes their learned way of being in the world, like a relationship blueprint they follow without even realizing it.
The handbook also touches on attachment styles, briefly. Secure, anxious, avoidant, disorganized. And how those less secure styles, the anxious or avoidant ones, often link into people-pleasing.
Yeah, it makes sense. It becomes a way to constantly seek reassurance, maybe?
Or desperately try to avoid rejection, like you're trying to fill a gap from early on.
That's a good way to put it. What's insightful here is how these early attachment experiences can create these really deep-seated expectations about relationships.
Like what to expect from people.
Yeah. If you learned early on that love is unreliable, or maybe conditional. You might constantly strive to earn it by pleasing others, always on guard, looking for signs of potential abandonment. That anxious energy can really fuel people-pleasing.
And then there's the impact of trauma. The handbook specifically mentions the fawn response. Can you explain that a bit for anyone who hasn't heard the term?
Sure. So the fawn response is basically a survival strategy.
Yeah.
It tends to develop when someone faces an inescapable threat, like ongoing abuse or chronic neglect.
Okay.
So instead of fight, flight, or freeze, the person seeks safety by appeasing the threat, by caretaking the abuser, trying to become indispensable or, non-threatening.
Trying to placate them.
Exactly. The handbook also mentions some other expanded trauma responses like fumble, forget, flop, just highlighting the different ways we try to cope with overwhelming stress.
Right.
But the really crucial thing about fawning is that even if it was a necessary and frankly brilliant survival tactic back then, it can unfortunately become this ingrained pattern in adulthood, even when we're no longer in danger.
So that yes.
Might just be an echo of a time when saying no felt genuinely unsafe, physically or emotionally.
Wow. So finding yourself habitually saying yes, really struggling to assert your own needs, that might actually be operating from a very deep, almost automatic trauma response.
It's definitely a possibility. It's a really powerful insight and potentially transformative for people to realize that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the book then goes on to describe different types of people pleasers, which I found really helpful, actually, seeing the different ways it can show up.
Yeah, these archetypes can help us understand the different motivations underneath. So we have the rescuer.
Okay.
This person feels valuable by solving other people's problems, but they often end up enabling those people and completely ignoring their own needs.
Like the example of Sarah always lending Mark money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While her own bills pile up. Then there's the approval seeker.
Ah, that sounds familiar.
Their main driver is that constant need for external validation. They'll often, shift their opinions or behaviors just to fit in, terrified of rejection.
Like David suddenly becoming a huge fan of whatever his new friends are into.
Precisely. Adapting completely.
And then you have the conflict avoider.
Yeah, they'll go to pretty extraordinary lengths to keep the peace, even if it means sacrificing their own well-being or needs.
Right. And the savior, how's that different from the rescuer?
It's a bit more intense, maybe. The savior almost seems to seek out drama and intensity in these rescue scenarios.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's a way to distract from their own unmet needs.
Like Michael, who jumps in to fix everyone else's problems while his own life is kind of falling apart.
Exactly. Creating dependency, maybe masking their own issues. The handbook also mentions the victim, who might seek care and attention by appearing helpless.
It's fascinating how these different roles seem to serve different internal needs or fears.
Absolutely. And it's important to just briefly mention the connections to mental health, too.
Okay.
The handbook notes an association between people-pleasing and anxiety disorders, particularly things like social anxiety and generalized anxiety.
That makes sense. That constant fear of judgment or worry.
It can really fuel that need to constantly seek approval and avoid any potential conflict, any ripples.
The book also brings up this cool sociological idea, the looking glass self.
Yes. Cooley's concept.
The idea that we form our self-image based on how we think others see us.
Right. Not necessarily how they actually see us, but our perception of their perception.
And this seems particularly relevant for people pleasers, right? They often base their whole sense of self-worth on those perceived external opinions.
Totally. It's like their internal mirror is entirely dependent on other people's reflections. And what's so telling there is how this external focus can lead to a really shaky sense of self.
Yeah.
If your identity is constantly being shaped by what you think others want,
you lose touch with yourself.
You can, yeah. You can lose touch with your own authentic desires, your needs, your values. It's like living your life according to someone else's script.
Okay, so we've really dug into the roots, the why behind people pleasing. Now let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about those internal processes that keep the cycle going.
Right.
The handbook talks about the inner critic. Oh man, that nagging voice. So many of us can relate to that.
Definitely. The inner critic is that harsh, judgmental voice inside our heads, constantly putting us down, magnifying our fears of disapproval. For people pleasers, this inner voice can be especially loud, relentless even, always whispering that you're not good enough.
Or reinforcing that need for external validation.
Exactly. And pushing you to avoid conflict at all costs. The handbook gives some common examples like, "You're so stupid. stupid or no one really likes you.
Or just that constant worry, what will people think?
Yeah. It's like having a really critical roommate living rent-free in your head, constantly critiquing everything.
It really is like a broken record of negativity. But where does this inner critic actually come from? Is it just there?
Well, the handbook explains it's often a learned pattern. It might stem from critical or judgmental figures in our childhood, or internalized societal expectations, or even past traumatic experiences.
So chaos can contribute too.
Yeah, growing up in unpredictable or chaotic relationships can definitely contribute. The inner critic almost acts like an internal drill sergeant, trying to keep you in line and safe from perceived threats by making you hypervigilant.
The book suggests a practical first step, though, using a thought record.
Right, CBT technique.
Where you note down the situation, the triggering negative thought, then you actively challenge it and try to reframe it.
Yeah, that sounds like a really concrete way to start pushing back against that inner bully, doesn't it?
It does.
Bringing those critical thoughts out into the open, actually looking at them, examining if they hold any real truth.
Yeah.
That's a crucial step.
Okay. And another key internal process the handbook highlights is self-gaslighting.
Self-gaslighting, yeah.
That's a term we hear a lot, but how does it specifically relate to people-pleasing?
Well, think of self-gaslighting as your inner voice trying to convince you that your own feelings, your own experiences aren't actually valid.
Okay.
The handbook explains how this directly supports people-pleasing. It causes you to minimize your own needs and constantly question your own perceptions.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Like someone might agree to take on a huge extra workload at their job, feel totally overwhelmed, and then tell themselves, oh, it's not that bad, I'm just being lazy, or I shouldn't complain.
Right. Invalidating their actual feelings.
Exactly. Completely invalidating their very real feelings of being overwhelmed or exploited. And this makes it incredibly difficult to even recognize when you're being taken advantage of, let alone consider setting a boundary.
It's like you're constantly undermining your own reality, making it harder to trust your gut feeling.
Precisely. And then the handbook dives into core beliefs.
Right. These sound like the real bedrock stuff, the deep-seated assumptions we hold.
They really are. Core beliefs are those fundamental assumptions we have about ourselves, about other people, about how the world works.
And they form early.
Often in early childhood, yeah.
Yeah.
And they can be incredibly difficult to even recognize, let alone shift.
So negative core beliefs, like what?
Things like, I'm not good enough, or my needs don't matter. Maybe I'm inherently selfish if I prioritize myself, or even if I say no, people will leave me.
Wow. Yeah, those would make it feel terrifying to assert your needs.
Absolutely. Or try to set any kind of boundary. The handbook circles back to that Sarah and Mark example.
Lending the money.
Well, or another one where Sarah feels she has to take on a presentation Mark doesn't want to do. Her deep-seated belief that she must be helpful fuels that relentless inner critic every time she even thinks about saying no.
So these deep, often unconscious beliefs drive the harsh inner critic.
Right.
Which then leads us to self-gaslight and invalidate our own experiences, all contributing to this ongoing cycle of people-pleasing. It's definitely a tangled web.
It really is.
Okay, but the good news is the handbook offers a whole range of really practical tools and techniques for actually breaking free.
Yes, definitely. It's not hopeless.
So let's dive into those solutions now.
Okay. The handbook really emphasizes that the key to change lies in consciously shifting our relationship with our own thoughts, first of all.
Right.
And also with our ingrained behaviors. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, offers some very effective techniques here.
Like those thought records we mentioned.
Exactly. And also Socratic questioning. The thought record gives you that structured way to, identify a trigger.
The automatic thoughts that pop up.
Yeah, the emotions you feel, then crucially, examine the actual evidence for and against those thoughts.
And then develop alternative, more balanced ways of seeing things.
Precisely. It helps you step back and get perspective.
The handbook walks through a really helpful example, actually. Sarah's boss asking her to take on a last-minute project again.
Yes.
It clearly shows how to break down those automatic negative thoughts like, I have to say yes, or they'll think I'm useless, and arrive at more realistic interpretations.
It's a great illustration. And Socratic questioning that's essentially about challenging our underlying assumptions. Right?
By asking ourselves a series of really probing questions.
Exactly. Questions that explore the actual evidence for our thoughts, the specific meaning we're assigning to events, the validity of the thought itself, and importantly, exploring alternative perspectives.
The handbook gives a good example around the difficulty of saying no to helping a friend move.
Yeah, how Socratic questioning can help unpack that guilt and obligation you might feel. Asking things like, what's the evidence my friend will hate me if I say no? Or, what's another way to look at this situation?
Okay. Another really valuable CBT tool the handbook covers is recognizing and actively challenging cognitive distortions.
Yeah. Yes, the unhelpful thinking styles.
Those predictable patterns of thinking that really reinforce our negative beliefs. The book lists several common ones.
Like all or nothing thinking, black and white thinking.
Yeah, that one. Also catastrophizing, expecting the worst possible outcome.
Personalization, taking everything personally.
Using lots of should statements, I should always be available.
Yeah.
And emotional reasoning, believing something must be true because it feels true.
All of which sound incredibly relevant to the mindset of a people pleaser, don't they?
Totally.
And what's so important is learning to actually identify these distortions in our own thought patterns. The handbook gives a step-by-step process for developing more balanced thoughts.
How does that work?
Well, it starts with reviewing your thought records, looking closely at the evidence, pinpointing the specific distortions you're using, then actively creating a more balanced, realistic thought, considering alternative interpretations, maybe even testing out that new thought in real life.
And connecting it back to those deeper core beliefs we talked about.
Exactly. It even gives a really thorough example of challenging that common thought, I'm such a terrible friend, just because you couldn't help David move house.
Breaking it right down.
Yeah. Showing how you can move from that self-blame to something more like, it's okay to have limits, and good friends understand that.
And then, crucially, the handbook emphasizes the importance of actually experimenting with new behaviors, not just thinking differently.
Yes. This is where the change really happens. But it stresses starting small.
Right. Don't try to overhaul everything at once.
Exactly. Focus on changing just one specific behavior at a time.
Yeah.
And also, prepare for discomfort. It will feel weird or scary at first.
And be kind to yourself through that process. It's so important. Self-compassion is key. Learn from the experience, whether it goes perfectly or not, and really try to celebrate the small successes. Gradually stepping outside that well-worn comfort zone of always putting others first.
Precisely. And a really crucial aspect of this behavioral shift is understanding boundaries.
Ah, yes. The B word.
The big B word. The book breaks down boundaries into different types: physical, emotional, mental or intellectual, material, and even time boundaries.
And it makes it really clear that healthy boundaries are absolutely essential, not just nice to haves.
Essential. For protecting our own well-being, our energy, our time, and also for fostering relationships that are actually based on mutual respect.
So how do you figure out what boundaries you need?
Well, the handbook suggests reflecting on those times you felt overextended, maybe taken advantage of, or noticed resentment building up. Those are often signs a boundary is needed or has been crossed.
Okay.
It also points out more subtle emotional boundary violations, things like gaslighting, being belittled or shamed, constant insults. Those need boundaries too.
And ultimately, understanding what boundaries you need comes down to connecting with your own values.
Yeah, your personal values and those fundamental needs we all have, like needing time for self-care, having enough energy, feeling emotionally safe, being treated with respect, having autonomy.
The handbook offers really practical, concrete advice for actually setting these boundaries in different areas: family, work, social life.
It does. It emphasizes using I statements.
Like, I feel overwhelmed when, rather than...
Or exactly. Expressing your needs clearly and directly, and being assertive, not aggressive. There's a difference.
And it stresses that setting the boundary isn't always enough, right?
Right. You often need to establish consequences for when boundaries are crossed. And this is the hard part. For many, be prepared to actually enforce them.
Oof, yeah. That can be tough, especially when you get pushback.
Oh, absolutely. And the handbook anticipates that. It offers really helpful strategies for dealing with pushback.
Like what?
Staying calm and assertive. Simply repeating your boundary, if necessary, like a broken record.
Without getting sucked into justifying it.
Exactly. Don't over-explain or justify. Set those consequences and consistently enforce them. And know when it's best to just disengage if the conversation isn't productive.
And how do you maintain them long-term? It sounds exhausting.
It takes practice. The book suggests things like writing your boundaries down to make them concrete, visualizing the positive benefits of holding them.
Seeking support.
Definitely. Actively seeking support from trusted people. And practicing self-compassion when you slip up, because you probably will sometimes.
Embracing imperfection.
Yeah. Focusing on progress, not perfection. And keeping the bigger picture of your well-being in mind. Remembering your why.
which leads really nicely into the integration of acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT.
Yes, ACT comes in here too.
The handbook introduces ACT as an approach that focuses on accepting difficult thoughts and feelings, like the discomfort of setting boundaries.
Accepting them as a natural part of being human.
While simultaneously committing to actions that are truly aligned with your personal values, what you want your life to be about.
Exactly. And a really key component here, as we just touched on, is self-compassion.
Treating ourselves with that same kindness and understanding we'd offer a friend going through this.
Absolutely. It's about acknowledging progress, like you said, not demanding perfection. It's a journey.
The handbook also highlights the value of building what it calls a no support system.
Ah, I like that name.
Me too. Having trusted people in your life who can offer encouragement, validation, maybe some accountability as you practice saying no and setting boundaries.
That support can make a huge difference. And developing assertiveness skills is also a cornerstone of moving away from people-pleasing.
The handbook defines assertiveness really well, I thought, as expressing your own needs and opinions respectfully while also respecting the rights of others. It's not about being pushy.
No, it's about balance. And it points out the many benefits: increased self-worth, more balanced relationships, less resentment building up.
And it helps you identify your own communication style, passive, aggressive, or assertive.
Yeah, through some reflective questions. Then it breaks down the key elements of assertive communication.
Like using clearer I statements again.
Being specific in your language. And paying attention to your nonverbal cues too. Eye contact, posture, tone of voice.
The example dialogues it provides for handling things like extra work requests or volunteer requests are incredibly practical.
They really are. Including how to respond to that pushback we mentioned.
It also offers concrete tips for practicing assertiveness.
Like starting with journaling your thoughts. Observing people you think are assertive role models.
Starting small in low-stakes situations.
Definitely. Consciously focusing on your own rights in a situation. Seeking feedback from trusted friends. And just being persistent with the practice. It's a skill.
And it directly addresses the obstacles people-pleasers face here, like that fear of rejection or overwhelming guilt.
Yeah, it offers strategies like reminding yourself of your why for setting the boundary, focusing on your rights, practicing self-compassion when you stumble, celebrating small wins.
And it provides even more helpful example dialogues for different contexts: family requests, borrowing things, work demands, social stuff.
Even navigating guilt trips and unsolicited advice. It includes useful techniques like the broken record, calmly repeating your point and fogging, acknowledging some truth and criticism without agreeing to change.
Okay, finally, the handbook introduces some core concepts from ACT more formally, starting with mindfulness.
Right, which it explains simply as paying attention to the present moment on purpose without judgment.
It introduces that helpful idea of the observer self.
Yeah, that part of you that can notice your thoughts and feelings without getting totally swept away by them. Like watching clouds pass.
And it emphasizes approaching your inner experience with curiosity, not judgment.
And clarifying that thoughts are just mental events, words, images, memories, urges. They aren't necessarily facts or commands.
Then it provides some really practical anchoring techniques to ground yourself in the present when you feel overwhelmed.
Like the 5-4-3-2-1 exercise. Noticing things you can see, hear, feel, etc.
Exactly. And the dropping anchor multisensory technique. Just ways to come back to the here and now.
Diffusion is another key ACT concept the handbook explains.
How does that work?
It's about learning to create some space between yourself and your thoughts. Recognizing they are just thoughts, not absolute truths you have to obey or believe.
Okay.
It offers some useful diffusion techniques, like just simply noticing a thought and saying, "Thanks, mind," for the input, without engaging further.
Or the thoughts as objects exercise, like the leaves on a stream visualization.
Exactly. The handbook includes a full script example for that, imagining placing thoughts on leaves and watching them float away. It helps you see them as transient events.
Containment is also introduced. What's that about?
Containment is about building the capacity to hold difficult emotions without being completely overwhelmed or needing to immediately get rid of them.
So it's not suppression.
No, definitely not suppression. The handbook uses a helpful analogy of holding a sea urchin, gently acknowledging the discomfort without being consumed by it.
Okay. How do you practice that?
By recognizing and naming the emotion, noticing the physical sensations in your body, allowing the emotion to just be there without judgment.
Breathing into it.
Yeah. Using your breath to gently explore the feeling. remembering that emotions are temporary, they come and go. There's even a combined technique focusing just on the physical sensations.
And last but definitely not least, the handbook covers values.
Ah, yes. Crucial in ACT.
Those guiding principles that give our lives direction and meaning, and it clarifies these are different from specific goals, right?
Exactly. Values are like compass directions, the direction you want to move in. Goals are the landmarks you might pass along the way.
And values are things you actively choose.
Yes, they're chosen, they're present-focused, how you want to act now, and they apply to how you want to treat yourself as well as others.
It introduces the bullseye values exercise as a way to identify what's truly important to you in different life domains.
That's a great tool. And the values balance scale, too.
What's that for?
For navigating those tricky situations where your values might seem to conflict, like maybe your value of helping others clashes with your value of self-care in a specific moment. It helps you find a balance.
And it discusses how to keep living in line with your values even when you face internal doubts or external pressures pushing you back towards people-pleasing.
Absolutely. It acknowledges the challenges, but emphasizes consciously choosing valued actions.
What's so powerful about ACT, it seems, is this idea of accepting those difficult thoughts and feelings, the fear, the guilt, as normal parts of being human.
Yeah, instead of constantly fighting them.
While at the same time, actively committing to behaviors that are really in line with your deepest values, what matters to you.
Exactly. And this can be incredibly freeing for people pleasers who spent so much energy trying to manage how others see them and avoid any kind of internal discomfort.
So the real takeaway here seems to be that overcoming people-pleasing isn't like flipping a switch. It's much more of an ongoing journey of self-discovery.
Absolutely. It really is.
It's about understanding where this pattern comes from, learning to challenge those ingrained negative thoughts and core beliefs.
Developing the skills to set and maintain healthy boundaries.
And ultimately, consciously aligning your daily actions with what truly matters most to you, not just to everyone else.
Exactly. It's about gradually shifting from a life driven primarily by the fear of disapproval or the need for external validation.
To a life guided more by your own internal compass, your values.
Precisely. And as the handbook emphasizes again and again, this takes consistent practice. It takes patience with yourself. And it takes a whole lot of self-compassion along the way.
This has been such a comprehensive deep dive. It really gives you, the listener, a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And maybe consider which of these techniques or ideas might be the most helpful starting point for you personally.
It does. Yeah. And it's just so important to remember that even taking those first few small steps in this direction, trying one small boundary, challenging one critical thought, that can lead to really significant improvements in your overall well-being and the quality of your relationships over time.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a massive overnight change.
Right. Small steps add up. So here's a final thought for you to really chew on. Consider how embracing the power of a thoughtful, value-driven no in your life can actually open up a huge amount of space for a more authentic, more meaningful, and truly fulfilling yes to the things, the people, the experiences that really matter to you.
That's a truly profound point to consider. Saying no to some things lets you say a genuine yes to others.
Exactly. Our primary source for today's deep dive, just to remind you, was the Therapist's Handbook for People Pleasers, Breaking Free from the Need to Please and Reclaim Your Life by Ronan Danziger,
who is both a cognitive behavioral therapist and, interestingly, a UX expert.
Yeah, his background offers a really interesting kind of modern perspective on these very human challenges, doesn't it?
It does.
We really encourage you to continue exploring these concepts if they resonate and maybe seek out further resources or support that might be helpful as you continue on your own unique journey.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for diving deep with us today.